Hello, everybody. I'm Shazneen, the program manager for climate change at the Center for Science and Environment. And today I'm joined by Avantika Goswami, the deputy program manager for climate change at the Center for Science and Environment. Today we're going to be talking about the climate action that has occurred in 2020 as well as will take place in 2021. And towards that, we're going to talk about COP25 that happened last year at Chile, Madrid, and the action that has taken place as part of the Paris Agreement in the last 5 years. We're going to talk about what's needed for COP26 that was supposed to occur this year at Glasgow, but has been postponed due to the COVID pandemic to next year, November 1st to November 12th in Glasgow, Scotland. And maybe what is India going to talk about? What is India doing? And what does the US perhaps need to do? So to start off, I'll ask Avantika to do a quick recap of COP25 and the Paris Agreement and everything that's happened in the last 5 years.
So thank you for that introduction, Shazneen. Looking ahead to COP26, which was scheduled to take place this year at Glasgow, but was postponed, like Shazneen mentioned, due to the coronavirus pandemic. It's scheduled to take place November 1st to November 12th, 2021. So before that, just to give a quick recap of what we're talking about, what is the Paris Agreement? So the Paris Agreement was hammered out over 2 weeks in Paris during the 21st Conference of Parties meeting of the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It was adopted on December 12th, 2015, and it marked quite a historic turning point in the global climate movement. World leaders representing 195 countries came to a consensus on an agreement that has commitments from all countries aimed at mitigating climate change and adapting to climate change. Now, at present, 189 countries out of a total of 197 members of the UNFCCC are party to the Paris Agreement. Under the Paris Agreement, each country has set nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. These are national targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and they have various end dates or targets like 2025 or 2030 and so on. What was decided is that these NDCs would be reviewed every 5 years through a stocktake process. And there was also something called a ratcheting mechanism built into the Paris Agreement, which means that every 5 years when the NDCs are reviewed, they are going to be revised upwards and updated to build in stronger and more ambitious targets for emissions reductions. The goal of the agreement is to keep the world at well below 2 degrees Celsius of warming, and aiming for and putting all efforts into limiting warming to below 1.5 degrees Celsius. However, as things are going right now, even if all NDCs were implemented, we would still be at above 3 degrees Celsius of warming.
So what's interesting here, Avantika, is that, in these last 5 years, we've seen a significant shift in the way that countries assess their climate contribution, their contribution to fighting climate change by the reduction of their GHG emissions. Historically, there's been a pattern. This is called the common but differentiated responsibility. So it's the historical context of the climate negotiation as it stands now and everything that we talk about in the COPs, COP25, COP21, next year, COP26. So what was the situation in the Kyoto Protocol, that was the predecessor of the Paris Agreement, was that countries with a historical context of their GHG emission pathways, at that time, whatever GHG they emitted, they were asked to take on, and it was a legally binding protocol to take on the duty and the responsibility based on their historical emission patterns. So rich countries polluted more. USA was right on top at the time, and the other rich countries, the EU, etc., were also right there on the top, still are. So they were historical emitters and had to take on the burden of responsibility because they were historical emitters. It's their duty of care. However, in the Paris Agreement, it's really incredible, but poorer countries, economies in transitions, countries like India signed up to also take on extra responsibility. It is pretty amazing if you think about it that we did not have the historical context of GHG emission, but we have taken on the responsibility because we do live in this one world and there are no borders, and we are feeling the impacts of climate change clearly visible from the United States with the wildfires to Siberia with the warming up to 38 degrees in certain parts of Siberia. I mean, unbelievable. The melting of the permafrost, and to the impacts that we see with cyclones in India, to the bushfires in Australia. So the impacts of climate change are being felt around the world, and therefore developing countries and under and poor countries and economies in transition have come on board and taken on this duty of care. So in Paris, it is a semi-legally binding agreement, and we have signed up to it, and that is why we have the nationally determined contributions. Every country decides for themselves how they want to reduce the GHG emissions and the pathway that they take. And ironically, out of all the countries, and interestingly, India was the only country on a 2-degree pathway warming. The rest of the countries, the EU was in a 3-degree pathway. Other countries of the world are higher. Russia is in a 4 plus. And now, recently, Brazil has submitted their revised nationally determined contribution, and they are on a critically insufficient 3-degree plus pathway.
So what do we really need in terms of COP26? What are we thinking going into the next COP meeting, and what do we need to achieve in that meeting? So there are a few elements that will make COP26 more of a success than the past meetings. One is what countries will do this year in order to advance climate ambition. So countries are supposed to, considering it's been 5 years since 2015, countries are supposed to submit upwardly revised NDCs. So they're supposed to enhance the targets that they've set for their emissions reductions. Another indicator of success will be what will be the sort of level of negotiations and state of negotiations that will take place at COP26, because as we know that there are always competing interests. There are certain countries like Brazil, India, and China who have a certain set of priorities, whereas the US, the EU tend to have different priorities as they represent the developed part of the world. It'll also be interesting to see what kind of partnerships emerge ahead of COP26 in order to successfully implement and enhance the ambition of the Paris Agreement. What alliances between various countries, what blocks will emerge, so that will really determine which parts of the agenda will be advanced. So countries do need to submit enhanced NDCs. This was also 2020 was also the year when rich countries, wealthy developed countries were due to deliver the target of $100 billion a year in climate finance. And we know that that hasn't happened. And the UNFCCC will definitely conduct some sort of a review. The hope is that some review will be conducted ahead of COP26 to determine where we are on this particular climate finance goal.
Yeah, Avantika, exactly. So COP26, the focus of it is going to be NDC enhancement. Countries in the latter half of 2020, so now, have been submitting their net zero pledges, net zero ambition and net zero targets. What that means is that most countries intend to peak their GHG emissions by 2030 and are thereafter reduce to net zero by 2050, which is very exciting. But however, these are just generic plans. So you need to fill in these plans with actionable interventions that will actually enable you to go towards net zero in 2050. So the NDCs are essential towards that, because NDCs are more short-term plans than these net zero plans that go on right up to 2050. So the enhanced NDCs are absolutely imperative right now. And COP26 is going to be all about that. Hopefully from tomorrow onwards, that is going to be the direction and push that we move towards. There are certain countries that have been a bit not fully with the spirit of the Paris Agreement, such as Brazil, where they have kept their NDCs as it is, but have contentiously changed their emission base number. So they can, in fact, emit more, but at the same time uh, you know, continue to stick to their NDC target. So in a way, it is, clever accounting. And we hope that going forward, other countries actually follow the spirit of the Kyoto Protocol and genuinely reduce their GHG emissions towards COP26 and come up with that plan. So a core focus of COP26 is going to be coming up with the rule book for the carbon market, also known as Article 6. So over here, the primary issue is the importance of avoiding double counting of your carbon credits. And to make sure they are not included by both the host country and the purchasing country. And that is really a bone of contention. Which country can actually count these carbon credits and therefore ensure a net reduction in emission rather than just offsetting them elsewhere? You see, so you don't want to just transfer your GHG emissions to another country, but you actually want to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions in real terms, net reduction. Yeah. So there was an agreement which was almost reached earlier in COP24. This has now been postponed, and we will again have to begin from scratch in COP26. So this is, a real bone of contention. Another issue is going to be really taking forward loss and damage in COP26 forward. So loss and damage pertains to many events, such as an example, extreme events that are happening as we see them around the world. So how do we support these countries? So the loss and the damage, to account for that and to provide finally a financial assistance package. So that is a real major issue. And that brings me neatly to finances. So Avantika touched upon the fact that in the Paris Agreement, 100 billion a year was supposed to be, supported. The rich countries were supposed to support the poorer and economically developing countries, emerging countries, sorry. And that has not happened. Actually, only 10 billion was shared, which is really not enough. So going forward into COP26, there has to be a real acknowledgement of finances towards the Green Climate Fund, the GCF, and for countries to be able to access that fund according to their differentiated responsibilities. Yeah. So that is the work we are hoping to move forward with in COP26.
I think, as you said, Article 6 is going to be a really contentious subject. Double counting is something that is on everyone's minds. Additionally, there's the whole issue of whether the Kyoto Protocol era, credits can get transferred over to the Paris Agreement. And there were specific countries like Australia and Brazil who, during COP25, were in favor of transferring Kyoto credits over to the Paris Agreement. But there's a number of countries like the EU bloc and so on who are against it, believing that we need to start afresh. India was on the side of countries like Brazil because there are about 750 million units of Kyoto era CERs, or certified emission reductions, that India still has stock of, based on the adoption of various low carbon technologies and so on. And India is looking to sell off these CERs. So it's definitely in favor of not scrapping all of that work that has been done and the credits that have been accumulated.
Yes.
So definitely very contentious issue. We need to treat the concept of net zero with a little bit of skepticism, because while it's great to have this target of net zero emissions by 2030 or 2050, very few countries have laid out a detailed roadmap on how they're going to achieve net zero targets.
Precisely.
So we're seeing overwhelmingly that there's a focus on sinks. So using forests and other land-based sources as an option to absorb carbon. And of course, everyone is very excited about carbon removal technologies like direct air capture and so on. But speaking about sinks, first and foremost, we've seen the scientific consensus says that we do not know the extent of our land-based sinks the current terrestrial sink is quite transient as well. So it's changing almost as we speak. So really, I mean, basing your future climate mitigation goals on something that we don't know the extent of is definitely risky. On carbon removal technologies like carbon capture and storage, I do know that the IPCC as well has sort of talked about the requirement for these technologies to build them into our future sort of approaches to decarbonization and so on. But the fact remains that there are only some 20 sites worldwide where carbon capture and storage has been tested out. And we're thinking of trusting the fossil fuel majors and the large fossil fuel companies to implement this technology and literally suck up carbon from their operations and from the atmosphere. But honestly, without a significant amount of regulation and enforcement and oversight, I don't see technologies like this taking off and playing the kind of significant role that we are really banking on at this point. So we do need to approach all of this with a spirit of caution, and make sure that we're actually implementing transformative changes rather than plans that don't have a lot of
temporary
substance. Yeah.
So now we should talk about what India has been doing in terms of its international pledges. And essentially, it is this, that towards 2030, India has unconditional targets. First of three say that 33 to 35% of emission intensity reduction is what we will undertake of our GDP. The second is that fossil fuel share of cumulative power generation capacity will be reduced by 40% again by 2030. And we will create additional cumulative carbon sinks. The same thing you talked about earlier, terrestrial land-based sinks of 2.5 to 3 gigaton carbon dioxide equivalent by 2030. So this was globally the only NDC that was on track to a 2-degree warming pathway by the end, by century end.
Right.
It is more ambitious than EU's. It is more ambitious. US doesn't have one currently. Donald Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement, and President Joe Biden said he's going to get back into it, but you're going to talk about that in a bit. So India, meanwhile, coming back home, what can we do? Currently, other countries are coming up with their net zero pledges and targets. India hasn't done that. Towards COP26, the spirit of the agreement is to revise and come up with more ambitious NDCs. Towards that, India can actually come up with more ambitious NDCs, at least where renewable energy is concerned, because Prime Minister Narendra Modi has very recently announced that towards 2030, we are going to enhance our renewable energy capacity by 450 gigawatts, which is quite a bit. And that is going to lead to further emission reduction. And this can easily be absorbed into our current NDCs. Very recently, there has been a cross-ministerial committee for the implementation of the Paris Agreement being formed. This will also function as the national authority for the regulation of carbon markets. There are 14 ministries in total, headed by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, that are going to undertake activities at a national level together to enable or to action our NDCs. So India is working at it, but we can work at it more. Considering other countries are coming up with net zero targets, we do not want to fall behind. And what is very forward looking is that if we focus more on decarbonizing, on moving towards clean technology, renewable energy, this is going to lead to our markets opening up more. We'll only do more good. I think also it is worth talking a little bit about other major economies. We could talk about the United States. Avantika, if you'd like to mention something about NDCs, net zero, and the US.
So yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Shazneen. So yeah, without going into too much detail, just we can take a quick look at, the United States. They are currently the world's largest per capita emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, the world's second largest overall emitter, and the largest historical emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. And the US was a part of the Paris Agreement during President Barack Obama's stint. But then when Donald Trump became president of the United States, he withdrew the US from the Paris Agreement. And they have formally now withdrawn on November 4th, 2020, just last month. So the US is no longer a party to the Paris Agreement. However, we do know that President-elect Joe Biden has pledged to rejoin the Paris Agreement as soon as he assumes office. And I think it's just a question of him approaching the UN Secretary General with the intention of rejoining. And then it's a 30-day process, and the US can rejoin the Paris Accord once again. It's worth noting that even prior to Trump's election, the US was already set to miss its Paris commitment to lower carbon emissions by 26 to 28% below 2005 levels through 2025. And it's, quite obvious in multiple ways, both through data as well as just through watching the news, that a lot of opportunity has been lost in the past 4 years. Payments have not been made by the United States to the Green Climate Fund by the Trump administration. So we've lost out on a lot of time, and it will really be up to the Biden administration to put forth some really transformative and very ambitious intentions to decarbonize, as well as fulfill their other commitments to the global climate community. Joe Biden has set out a net zero by 2050 target in his climate plan, which, if one is to, be optimistic, will be implemented as soon as he takes over the presidency. But once again, although the United States emissions have been on the decline over the past few years, largely due to the fact that they've shifted over from coal-based electricity to primarily natural gas. There's still, in terms of overall contribution to global emissions, the US ranks number second, as I had mentioned. Transport emissions are increasing for the United States, especially due to low gas prices, as well as an increase in the amount of flying, increase in aviation traffic. So there's multiple ways in which the US can really commit itself to decarbonize its economy, and that's going to be up to the Biden administration. Also taking into account the needs of developing economies who are party to the Paris Agreement and playing their part in, transferring climate finance and technology to help developing countries decarbonize, as well as continue on a trajectory to develop their countries in the way that the Western developed economies have. I think the US is going to be responsible to do a lot of that. So we're hoping that we see some rapid action on that front. Okay.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning about the transportation sector that you touched upon, that the transportation sector is a federally controlled sector. So all GHG emissions that have to be reduced from that sector will have to be undertaken at a federal level. So when Trump got the US to step out or withdraw from the Paris Agreement, a lot of different states, companies, and private entities took up their own net zero pledges, and it is highly admirable that happened. But now going forward, so the Biden-Harris government is going to have to really take control of that and switch to electric vehicles.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think based on our team's discussions earlier today, I was reminded that the US has approximately 700 natural gas projects either proposed or under construction at the moment. So despite Biden's claims that it's going to be just a bridge fuel over to renewables, just looking at prevailing low gas prices, as well as the infrastructure lock-in that comes with building up natural gas, it's very optimistic to say that it will really remain a bridge fuel, and that the US is not going to be dependent on natural gas for the next couple of decades. I don't really see that happening unless a very concerted effort is made to ramp up renewables and stop new construction of natural gas infrastructure.
So the final word would be that towards COP26, there have been enough pledges already made by various countries, but we are still on a 3+ degree warming pathway. So there's this time for action is now. which basically means to move away from fossil fuels, to decarbonize, to invest in new and innovative technology, to come up with the final rule book for Article 6 for the MRV process, and really form, work towards a green recovery. So, factoid is that the emission gap report stated that, if the world continues or takes on a path of green recovery, we will save 25% of emissions by 2030. We are not on that path right now. So it's not too late to change track. And here is hoping that COP26 in November of next year, that is 2021 at Glasgow, is actually going to reorient us towards a 1.5-degree pathway, warming pathway, which is absolutely essential to avoid dangerous climate change. All right. Thank you very much. It's goodbye from us here at CSC. Goodbye, Shazneen.
Thank you.